Tula's Tips for Caregivers. Health is on the air with Tula Wootan, your source to go for resources and information to help you in this rewarding but sometimes challenging role. Tula's Tips for Caregivers is brought to you by Agewell Institute at Baptist Health, by Elmcroft Assisted Living and Memory Care. Now here's Tula.
Tula founded the Caregiver Coalition in Northeast Florida, an influential partnership of 14 nonprofit organizations and individuals working together to positively impact the quality of life for caregivers. With the goal of assisting and encouraging caregivers in this rewarding role, Tula has been hosting a live weekly radio show, Tula's Tips for Caregivers. Help is on the air since 2010. Tula is recognized by community leaders as a trusted spokesperson for those seeking direction and support. Many seek Tula's advice and support on issues relating to caregivers. She holds herself accountable to caregivers she represents as she understands the caregiving role well. She has been a caregiver for both parents for 4 years. Tula strives to be a role model for caregivers through her tireless advocacy on their behalf and by example through her own personal caregiving role. In doing so, she helps caregivers to realize that they are not alone and that there are others ready and willing to help.
Don't listen to all that rigmarole. I'm here today because I love AARP sign up there that says I heart caregivers. I love caregivers. I understand full well the role of the caregiver, the challenges of caring for someone, the sweet joys of caring for someone that you love, because it is all of the above, isn't it? But I want to talk to you today a little bit about the role of caregiving. I'm going to kind of give you a brief overview, maybe a snapshot of what's going on in the United States and the role of caregiving. I'm going to base my talk on Rosalynn Carter's famous quote. Many of you may not know, sweet little Rosalynn Carter started the Rosalynn Carter Institute for Caregiving just over 30 years ago. They just had their big 30th celebration, and little Rosalynn Carter was a caregiver from the time she was 12 years old. She started off caring for grandparents, and then later for parents and for siblings. As she said, I don't think I've ever had a time in my life when I wasn't a caregiver for someone. She's still around. She's in her early 90s. She and President Carter both. And they do a lot of good work for a lot of people, but she's well known, loved, and respected for the work she's done for those of us in America who are caregivers. And you might be thinking to yourself, why all this focus on caregivers? Isn't it something we've all been doing since the beginning of time? You love your family members. You care for your family members. It's a natural, right? I was trying to think this morning of some of my favorite biblical stories and maybe instances of caregivers. And the first thing that popped in my head, not many things pop in my head early in the morning, but the first thing that did pop in was the story of Ruth, who, when her husband died, can't say his last name, it's one of those long Hebrew names, but when he died, she had 2 sons, and one of the sons, Ruth, one of the daughters-in-law, Ruth, decided to stay with Naomi. The other one took off and went and did her thing. That's okay. But the other one decided to stay with her and stay with her through end of life and care for her. And she said, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. And where you die, I'll be there. That's love, isn't it? And that's what caregiving is all about. When you get right down to it, you do it for the people that you love. So we're going to talk about her quote today. I'm going to break up her quote to 4 different sections, and we'll talk about a little bit what a caregiver is, what a caregiver does. You already know that, don't you? The stages of caregiving and how to prepare. I too, as Dale said, have been a caregiver. I've been a caregiver for both of my parents for about the last 5 years. My dad just left this earth in November of last year, so I'm in that final stage of grieving and doing a lot of the wrap-up that happens. Caregiving does not end when your loved one dies. So let's talk about her famous quote. And I will learn to do the clicker. This is what Rosalynn has to say. There are 4 types of people in this world. those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, those who have been caregivers, and those who will need caregivers, those of us who need care. In other words, it's going to impact all of us, right? If you haven't been a caregiver yet and you are over the age of 40, all I can say is hang on. Your time's coming. I told you what we're going to cover and a little bit on how to prepare. So, what is a caregiver anyway? For context of our talk today, we're going to talk about the non-professionals. We're going to be talking about family members. Again, those who do what they do because they love the person in their life. Whether the person's a senior or someone with a disability, a child. For the purposes of this coalition, we are focused on caregivers of frail elders. We made that decision when we formed in 2008. Again, we all know our frail elders are 85 plus. It's the fastest growing segment of our population. And therefore, they need care. So let's talk about the graying of the nation a little bit. We all know, again, that the 85 population is the fastest growing part. We are all living longer, right? Many of us are living beyond our golden years, so to speak. Our lifespan has increased, but our health span has not necessarily increased, right? We're still getting older. We're still getting into our 90s. A lot of people are getting into their hundreds easily these days. There are lots of centenarians in this world today. But they still have the same chronic long-term illnesses that have always been around. You just have them for longer because thanks to medicine and technology and everything, we just want to keep people alive and keep them going and keep them going. And that's okay to a point, right? When quality of life starts suffering, I think you have to have some serious discussion about that. I want to say a little bit about caregiving in your older years. My first aha moment about how you could really be doing it in your later years was when I went to one of our inpatient units at community hospice to meet a friend's grandmother. So she said grandmother, so I was expecting the grandmother to be the patient. Well, her grandmother was an 80-year-old woman caring for her 97-year-old mother. And you know what? Poor little selfish Tula thought, oh God, don't let that be me. I'm honest, you know. I have a sweet mommy, but she has dementia. And she can be a little 90-pound pistol on any day of the week. So I was like, oh, I can't do this, God. Can you imagine being 80 years old and having your own illnesses and caring for a parent? This is just a few more of those stats I thought I could share with you about the aging of our population. In the year 2000, we had about 45 million people over the age of 65. By the year 2030, which is just around the corner, there's going to be about 94 million people over the age of 65. Twice as many. That number's growing fast. One of the stats that I love to tell people is that baby boomers today are turning 65 every day to the rate of 10,000 a day. We are aging, and that will be occurring for about the next 15 years. 10,000 a day turning 65 for the next 15 years. I am in that cohort. I am one of those boomers. This is one of those issues we are going to be facing. One thing that I did want to say before we go completely over all of this is the breakdown of caregivers in America today as we know it. 60% of them are women. Raise your hand if you're surprised at that. I used to listen to this male caregiver friend of mine, and he cared for his wife for a long time after a stroke. And he said, I didn't sign up for this. I don't have that caring, nurturing gene like women have. I have the go play golf, go fish gene. It's not a natural for a lot of men. And I'm not discounting men because there are a lot of men who are in that role. And I do want to applaud you. And I will say, when I first started studying this in about 2008, the percentage of male caregivers was only about 30%. So men are rising to the occasion and taking on the role. The other thing that's happening is that there are more millennials in this role now, caring for parents and grandparents. 25% of caregivers in America is a millennial. That surprised me when I read it, because that's not the picture you read about of the personality of a millennial, is it? But they are rising to the occasion as well. 70% of us caregivers work full-time. I say us because I'm still one. There's actually a term in the caregiving industry called the silent working caregiver. Over 50% of caregivers choose not to tell their employer that they're caring for a loved one at home. Now, why do you think that is? Any of us happen to spend a lot of time on the phone for stuff not related to your job? A lot of time going back and forth to the doctor's office, MRI scans, PT, all the things that you have to do during the course of a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, impact your job, don't they? I can so relate, because I went through that a lot with my sweet father, who called me sometimes 3 or 4 times in the middle of the day. When he was taking care of my mom, and it was really challenging because of her dementia. Poor man, he would call me and go, "Tula, Tula," in his high-pitched voice because he was so stressed. "Tula, help! Tula, talk to her! Talk to her! She wants another hydrocodone. I just gave her one 3 minutes ago. She doesn't remember. Talk to her!" Well, and he had the phone to mom, and I'm at work, and I'm like, what am I going to do? That is real life for the working caregiver. There's an impact on you. You've got stress at work, and you bring the stress of being a caregiver with you, to work, and that compounds the stress that you feel. Working caregivers report that about 68% of them make accommodations. They either go part-time, maybe if they're lucky, have an employer will let them work from home for a while, do some job sharing. A lot of people retire earlier than they planned. Women are really guilty of this. And I say guilty because I don't think it's the best idea myself, normally. When a woman retires early to go home and care for an aging parent, for instance, the financial impact on average to her is $324,000 to her retirement portfolio. My mama used to say to me, "When are you going to quit your job and take care of me?" I was single at the time. Say, "Mommy, you got $1 million in the bank to take care of me, so when you're gone," that's a huge impact. Who can afford that hit to their retirement portfolio? It's a little bit less for men, which I find is kind of interesting. So here's a picture that really sums up the female working caregiver. Yes, I have felt that way many days. You are juggling everything. You have a full-time job where there are expectations of you all day long. And yet you know that during the day you're worried about your loved one maybe falling, particularly if they're alone at home. You're managing their meds. You're doing their insurance phone calls from home. Doctor's visits back and forth. This poor woman's trying to have a little home and family life in between it all. Trying to keep her relationship with her spouse intact, because it does cause stress, and there have been divorces over this issue of caregiving. Maybe she wants to have other work in the community. Maybe she wants to go to church and be involved in caring for others. Really hard to find time for that. A lot of churches actually are starting to do some caregiving programs now where they're trying to get a group of volunteers in their church to relieve the caregiver on Sunday morning so they can come to church. What a novel idea. Self-care is usually the last on the list for this person, and that's the thing I really would like to talk to you all about today as we get further in this discussion, because my belief, and I hold it from the work I've been doing for the last 10 plus years and from my own personal experience, is if you don't put yourself at the top of your list and take good care of yourself in every way, physically, emotionally, spiritually, every way, you may not make it through. There are some stats that I'll tell you in a little bit that may alarm you about caregivers dying first. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the value of caregiving. If caregivers were paid a whopping minimum wage, the economic value, according to a RAND study that was done in 2015, the economic value would be $522 billion. That is a bigger budget than our whole nation's Medicaid budget. And I want to read to you a quote from the President and CEO of the National Alliance for Caregiving, because it really kind of hit home. And I hope it resonates a little with you, and at least you'll think about it. Gail Hunt said, "This is an exploitation issue. The family caregiver is doing this for free and is being really exploited, with more and more being expected from them in terms of performing nursing and medical tasks such as giving injections. The physical, emotional, spiritual, and financial toll that it takes is well documented in many studies. Many caregivers die before their care receiver, largely in part due to the stresses involved with caregiving and self-neglect." There's some good news coming in all this, and I have it saved for the last slide. There's actually some legislation being proposed to help and support caregivers. I'm saving the good news for the last. So you just have to stay here with me. I thought this was an interesting study that AARP did in 2015. We all know, again, that our aging population is the fastest growing. At the same time, families are shrinking in number, right? So, does that make you think who's going to be around to take care of me? When I'm old, don't be counting on your kids. As we age, there will be fewer people to take care of us. This graph shows that in 2010, there were 7 family members available for every aged person over the age of 85 to take care of them. By 2030, there's going to be 4. Families are shrinking. So what do caregivers do, like I need to tell you? Every one of this room's a caregiver of some sort, right?
Yes.
Okay. Caregivers assist with things that are called activities of daily living. You know, helping them transfer back and forth from bed to wheelchair, helping them get bathed, helping them get dressed, making sure they eat, preparing their foods, giving them their medications, whatever it takes, all the things that we do normally. Your frail elders need help with that. 60%, and this stat kind of alarmed me now, 60% of them are now doing those medical tasks that Gail referred to, like injections and trach care and wound care, things that used to only be done in the hospital. 60% of caregivers are doing that now, and what's more, they're being sent home with that much training. Only 16% report that they got any training in the hospital on how to do what they need to do to take care of their loved one. Again, can't help myself, personal story. My mom was in the hospital in 2015. Great hospital. Used to work at it. Great hospital. But they discharged her way too soon. And I worked in the field, and I didn't really understand what I was supposed to do for her care. So I took her right back that same evening. And you know what? I work in the field, and I know that hospitals, if a patient's readmitted within 30 days of their discharge, the hospital loses the payment on that first readmission. I knew that. I just didn't care. You know what? Because I didn't know what to do for my mom. And when they admitted her, or readmitted her, they kept her 9 days. Now, what does that tell you? It's a hard job. You've got to have somebody helping you. The instrumental activities of being a caregiver, like this new term called instrumental activities of daily living, those are the things like helping with the medicine, helping with the legal stuff, the insurance phone calls that you do, the medical back and forth, taking them places, transportation issues, getting them places. Those things are time consuming, folks. So time consuming that caregivers on average spend about 24 hours a week caring for their loved one. And I'm talking about working caregivers who work a full-time job and go home and spend about another 24 hours a week caring for a loved one. Okay, I can't help myself. I have to give you a stat because I think it's important. Let's talk about those caregivers and their health and how they don't put themselves first. And studies show that caregivers truly are at a higher risk than non-caregivers for things like depression, stroke, hypertension, many other diseases, diabetes. For caregivers who are caring for someone who has any form of dementia, like Alzheimer's, about 40% of them die first. Now let's fast forward, let's age these caregivers to people who were over the age of 70, spousal caregivers, your frail elderly caring for their spouses. When that's the picture, about 70% of those caregivers die first. Typically they're older, obviously, they got their own illnesses and they're not tending to them, and about 70% of them die first. That's not what I want for anybody in this room. So let's talk about this a little bit. All of us are going to be involved in caregiving. I said that. So where are you in this stage? And I might go through this part a little quickly because I do know that all of you are caregivers. But let's talk about those who are caregivers and some of the impact and the importance of self-care. Caregiving is not for the weak, right? The physical stresses involved can be tremendous. Caregivers are really high risk for shoulder injuries, back injuries, all that pulling and lifting and transferring. Many people don't get teaching on how to properly do that. We often offer that at these conferences. Physical therapists teach that because there's a way you're supposed to do that so you don't injure yourself. Environmental stresses. Sometimes you're moving everything around your house to accommodate wheelchairs and hospital beds and bedside commodes. Sometimes they're put in the middle of your living room, right? Because that's the only space for all of that. All that stuff just really doesn't go with my Mediterranean decor. I didn't like it. I didn't like it one little bit. But you know what? You do what you have to do for your loved one. Lots of changes that impact your life that cause stress. The social stress is one that really worries me because a lot of caregivers are very guilty of isolating. They stop doing what they love doing. It's just going to lunch with your girlfriends or out with the guys to throw a bowling ball or fishing or play cards or whatever it is that brings you joy and pleasure. Many caregivers stop because they think I have to be here. I have to be doing this all the time. Nobody else can do it as good as me. Is the hell? Wrong. Keep doing the things that you love to do. Do not isolate yourself. What does isolation usually lead to? Bingo. Don't want that for you guys. Financial stresses I've talked about a little bit, but I haven't said that about 40% of caregivers report using up all or most of their savings in this role. I read another study this week that said caregivers spend on average about $7,000 a year out of their pocket taking care of their loved one. And again, many quit work prematurely. The emotional stress almost doesn't even need to be mentioned. You're seeing someone you love decline. You know the eventual outcome. There's sadness. Maybe there's some guilt. Maybe there's some anger. Maybe you didn't have any choice in this role. There are a lot of caregivers who are thrust into that role with absolutely no choice, or maybe they felt obligated. Maybe that builds a little resentment. Maybe if you're caring for parents, you don't have siblings helping. That is incredibly common. The role of caring for parents typically falls on one person. If there's a daughter, it's typically the oldest daughter. And let me just add, if she works in healthcare, everything falls on that person. And you know what? I did it, and I wouldn't change it for the world. But it took a toll. It can be very challenging and stressing. So, those are the emotional stresses. I've talked to you a little bit about some of the healthcare risks. The bottom line is, if a caregiver is caring for a loved one and they're experiencing exhaustion or chronic illness or depression or any of these things I've so joyfully talked about today, they can't perform their caregiving duties well enough to really take good care of their loved one. And so as a result of that, their loved one's condition may decline which of course increases the caregiver's responsibilities. And so you've got this circle going, right? Bottom line is, and I've said it thousands of times in my career, please take good care of yourself. We'll talk about some ways to do that, okay? All right, I'm one of those people that doesn't love exercise, you know. I have to make myself do it. But the more I read, the more I'm convinced that it is the cure-all or panacea for just about what ails you. Whether it's depression, they've already done lots of studies that show that it can help ward off the onset of Alzheimer's and lots of other diseases, including different types of cancer. Bottom line is find something you like to do. You have to like to do it and get out there and do it at least 3 days a week. If it's just walking your dog through the neighborhood, you know, it's good for the dog and good for you too. So do what you enjoy. Find a caregiver buddy. That's a phrase I coined a few years ago because I really don't think you should do it all alone. Find somebody that knows what you're going through because they're going through it too. And maybe you can pick up the phone and commiserate a little bit or share joys. They understand. Know your limits. You can't be what I call the big E. Everything to everybody. You just can't. Stop. Put boundaries. I don't really have it in this presentation, but I'll tell you about it. There's something called the Caregiver Bill of Rights. You can Google that. Caregiver Bill of Rights, written by Joe Horn. It says things like, I have the right to say no sometimes. What a concept. And not feel guilty about it. I have a right to have my own life and go do the things I enjoy doing without my loved one with me. Yes. It's really important. I would really ask most of y'all, all of you, to go ahead and do that. We know the importance of enough sleep and rest. It's hard to do, particularly if you're in the home with someone who might be facing some sort of dementia, and we all know that those patients sometimes get up in the middle of the night and they roam. It's hard to get the rest that you need, but it's critical. Sleep when they're sleeping, just like a newborn. Sleep when they're sleeping. Rest when you can. Eat a good diet. Your body needs the fuel, the right fuel, to make it go and keep functioning during this time. Every conference I do, typically at the end, I ask, what is your biggest need? If I could give you a gift today, what would it be? And without fail, caregivers say respite, a break, somebody to come in and relieve me so I can go do something for myself, something I love. Find it. There are wonderful organizations that offer it. Yes, there are some here today that, like Homestead Senior Care, they offer it. They can give you a companion to come in and take care of your loved one while you can go. And yes, it costs. But there are some other programs through the Older Americans Act where you can get at least some limited respite, and Aging True is where you go to talk about that. They have trained volunteers who will come in a couple of times a week and provide some relief for the caregiver. So go see every one of these vendors today. These are the resources that are here to help you in this role. There's lots and lots of technology out there. I'm not an expert on that, but even simple things like Facebook can help you. You say, how's that? Well, there are support groups for caregivers on Facebook. Who would have thought? I joined one called Working Daughter a couple of years ago, and it's an online Facebook support group where we help each other. We post messages, and this person's gone through that, and here's what I would suggest, that kind of thing. There's lots of other technology out there. There's something called Great Call that has these phones that are easy for elders to use. The numbers are bigger, they're lighted. They even have an emergency response on them. An emergency response button is really critical if you're caring for a loved one and you're going to leave them any point in time. They have to have that, and it may save their life. Use that a few times. Ways to take care of yourself. When was the last time you heard a good joke? Oh, somebody made a noise. I wonder if we've got any persons in here that can tell a good joke. Think about it for a minute, because I want to tell you that laughter has proven health and benefits. It decreases your blood pressure. It helps boost your immunity. It reduces stress, increases your diaphragm to make breathing a little easier. It even helps those who are suffering from depression. When was the last time you had a good old belly gut laugh? Laugh until you just couldn't stop laughing. Think about how good you felt. All right, there's my question. Anybody in here got a good joke? It's a good, clean joke. All right, you raised your hand first. Stand up and tell us your joke.
Okay, I don't tell jokes very well. But this one was told to me yesterday morning.
Stand up, darling.
Can you all hear me? Yeah. This one was told to me yesterday morning. And the joke goes like this. This elderly couple was lying in bed. And the wife said to her husband, "Honey, you don't hold my hand the way you used to." So the husband made his way to her side of the bed and grabbed her hand. And then she said, "Honey, you don't hold me the way you used to." So he maneuvered his body so he can hold her the way he once held her. Then she said, "Honey, you don't nibble on my ear the way you used to." And so he got out of the bed and she said, "Well, honey, where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to get my teeth."
That was good. Thank you. I hope my hubby got that on recording back there. He still has his teeth. Like that. You agree? I do too. Find a way to laugh every day.
You are listening to Tula's Tips for Caregivers. We'll be right back after this sponsor break. Hi, this is Tula, and I'm here to talk to you about Baptist's new Age Well Institute. Are you caring for a loved one who's 65 or older? Are you a boomer like myself who's caring for a parent? And perhaps your parent has been experiencing some decline in their overall health. Let me highly recommend to you the Baptist Age Well Institute. They have the only real geriatrician here in Northeast Florida who is able to look at the whole person. Their comprehensive approach includes a nurse, a doctor, a social worker, a pharmacist, a dietitian. They have their own physical therapy there. They can work with folks with memory disorders. My goal is to help you, the caregiver, find an organization that can care for your loved one who's 65 or older. I take my own parents there, and I highly recommend the Age Well Institute at Baptist. Please give them a call at 904-202-4243. Again, that's 904-202-4243. You'll be so glad you did.
Have you read the new book, Love Stories and Timeless Tips yet? It's by our own Tula Wooten with Tula's Tips for Caregivers. Tula is a caregiver too, as well as an expert on caregiving. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle at Amazon.com. The book is filled with touching stories of caregivers taking care of their loved ones. Each chapter has helpful ideas that we all can use. I love that Tula included a Tula's tip with each story. Her message to caregivers is clear. Take care of yourself so that you can take care of your loved one. This is a beautiful book for all caregivers to read, whether you're a part-time, full-time, or long-distance caregiver, or someone receiving care. You should get the book today. Just go to Amazon.com. Search for Love Stories and Timeless Tips by Tula Wooten. And now let's return to Tula's Tips for Caregivers, brought to you in part by Age Well Institute at Baptist Health, by Elmcroft Assisted Living and Memory Care. Once again, here's Tula.
All right, back to our 4 kinds of people. Those are going to be caregivers. How do you plan for this? Let me tell you, first of all, AARP back there has a great book called Prepare to Care. If you haven't picked it up, do that. It goes through everything you need to know to prepare for the future of caregiving. For those of you who are already in that role, and even if you are, it will help you. See, she's holding it up over there. Start having the conversation with your loved ones early. Have the tough conversations. Mom, what do you want? What do you not want as you get older? Where do you want to live? Do you want to try to stay independently in your own home the rest of your life? If so, what are you going to do when you can't take care of yourself? And you need to be placed somewhere where the fund's going to be. Assess their needs and try to determine what it is that they're going to need. Form your team, and I say this strongly because if there's a family involved, get everybody in the family at the table. Because inevitably, when somebody isn't at the table and one person's doing something and the other person doesn't know about it, warfare can break out, particularly among siblings. So form the family, get everybody together, and create a plan for caring for those that you love. Get all your legal and financial documents in place. We've got 2 elder law attorneys speaking here today. They have their booths set up as well. They're going to talk to you about the documents that you need to have in place, like the living will, and power of attorney, and will, and the things that I'm forgetting right now, pre-need guardianship. All those things they will talk to you about. It will save you a lot of headache later. Putting a plan in place is the best thing you can do for those in your life. Think about yourself. If you don't have all those things in place right now, and those people in your life who may be going to try to care for you later, that is the best gift that you can give them. Very, very important. I would also say, if you haven't purchased or thought about a long-term care insurance policy, think about it. We're all going to age. We're going to have something that's going to need some kind of care. You know, again, the studies say that 60% of Americans think they're not going to need any kind of care as they age and before they die, when 70% of us are, in fact, going to need a lot of long-term care support. Find a way now to fund it. And by the way, the older you get, the more expensive it gets for you to buy it. Buy in advance your own funeral or cremation plan. Don't leave that to your loved ones who are grieving when it happens. It's another emotional duress to put them under, and don't you think most funeral homes know that? Do it ahead of time. How can you help your friend who is a caregiver? I like this. This is really kind of funny. Some friends told me some of these things that you can say. One is important. Don't let them isolate themselves. We've talked about that. Offer to help. Call up your friend. What is it you really need today? It probably isn't a 9th casserole in the freezer. It may be somebody to come over and help with the laundry, or walk their dog, or give some respite care. Call them and ask them. Don't give unsolicited advice. People know. Offer respite. We've already talked about the whole caregiver buddy concept that is so important. Things to say to a caregiver. I'm with you in this. I support you. Let me know what you need. You can count on me. You're doing an amazing job. How are you holding up? I can't tell you how many times caregivers have told me they're so happy when their friends or other family members ask them how they're actually doing versus the person they're taking care of. What do you need me to do for you? These are the things that I think are kind of funny. And really, if you've got anybody in your life that would say any of these things to you, you might want to consider your relationship with them. What not to say to a caregiver? You look really tired. Are you taking good care of yourself? Really? You need to get a real life. Really? Let's not talk about it. Let's talk about something happy and fun. When the morning dies, you must be so relieved it's over. Really? People have said that to caregivers. How heartless. When are you going to get over it? For those who are grieving, many people say that to people who are grieving. There is no getting over it, is there? No. Ever this side of heaven. Be careful and be sensitive, and tell others in your life to be that sensitive with you, please. And if not, think about who you're letting in. That says it all. Can everybody read that? It says, sometimes the one who's been there for everyone else needs someone to be there for them. All right, let's go to the last type of person, those who have been caregivers. Life after caregiving. Is there such a thing? Let's plan for it now, okay? When I tell people to prepare for their life after caregiving, I tell them to plan for it now by continuing to do the things that you love to do now while you're a caregiver, while continuing your relationships with friends and other family members now. Don't let them go because you're so busy, because it might be hard to reestablish later. Don't lose yourself in the role of being a caregiver. The saddest statement I've heard from people who've lost their loved ones, and I hear it all the time, is I don't know who I am anymore now that I'm not a caregiver. That role has so taken up their whole life that they've lost themselves. Your loved one wouldn't want you to do that, would they? Give yourself time and go easy on yourself. It's not an easy job. Accept your emotions. They're normal. They're real. You're not a bad person if you're feeling angry about everything you've got to do. When you've lost someone, all bereavement counselors will tell you, don't make any big decisions for at least the first year. You're grieving. Your brain may not be functioning quite the way it was. There's this thing called grief fog. I still have it. No big decisions for the first year. Get bereavement counseling. There's a lot of it available in our community. Community hospice offers it for free for anyone who's lost a loved one, whether their loved one died in our program or not. This is a journey you can't walk alone. I'm in my 3rd grief journey, and I can't get through even this one without help. One of the things that I really believe is if you're hurting inside at any level, grieving, whatever, the best thing you can do is take that pain and do this. Reach out and help somebody else. Get your focus off of yourself. Help someone else, and in that, you will be healed. I believe that advocacy heals you. Might make a note of that. Advocacy heals you. I actually have a friend who wrote a book entitled that, Advocacy Heals You. Let's talk a little bit more about how to cope with grief. Talk about your loved one. Don't pretend they weren't here. A lot of people will do that, especially if the death was a sudden, tragic death. They quit talking about them. You still need to talk about them. They were an important part of your life. Celebrate them and remember them in ways that are meaningful to you and to your family. Maybe it's remembering each birthday or letting some balloons up in the air, going to the sky on their birthday. Maybe it's candles in honor for them in the holidays. Whatever it is, find ways to honor and recognize them. Allow yourself to cry. It's normal. It's healing to cry. Regain your own health. It's one of my goals for this year. I gave everything I had in caring for my dad, and I have no regrets for that. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat if he were here. But you know what? It does take a little bit of a toll. So this year, the focus is on exercise for me and eating right and taking some good trips. Do what you gotta do. Sometimes you have to put those on hold when you're taking care of a load, and we had to do that last fall. And I'm really glad I did, because I was able to be with my dad through some very stressful for him times. So focus on your health. Meet new people. Invite new people into your world. And accept that you've got a little bit of a new normal going on here. It's not ever going to be quite the same. But you're still going to be okay. I heard an acronym for the word HOPE, H-O-P-E. And it means, or the acronym says, hang on, pain ends. Hang on, pain ends. For those who are grieving, I really believe in the importance of this. Circle your wagons. Those people who are in your life, who you are close to, who you know love you, who you know wouldn't hurt you for the world, bring them close. After my husband died, I actually did that physically with one of my sons. I helped him get a house really close to me, because I needed them really close to me. Bring the people in your life that you love close. At the same time, it may be healthy to put boundaries in place for those people in your life who would hurt you without thinking twice, who might be toxic to you, who maybe have some really big issues of their own and they want to bring them to you. Put the boundaries in place. Only let certain people inside that safe space. I had to be told that this week. That's why I'm repeating it. I love what this says, and it's a little dark, so if you can't read it, I'll read it to you. Grief is the last act of love. The last act of love we have to give to those we loved. Where there is deep grief, there was deep love. Right? All right, this is actually the last person kinds of people I thought that one was, but I can't count today. So, if you're receiving care, remember your loved one has limitations. They can't do everything, and it's a tough job. Say thank you. Say it a lot. Say things like, you know what, I know you're giving up time to come here and be with me and do these things. I really do appreciate it, because it is a tough job. Get a break from each other. Yes, the caregiver needs a break from taking care of their loved ones. You know what? That care receiver might need a break from you too. They might need to see another face from time to time. Get a break from each other. And remember the 4 things that matter most. There's a book that a physician by the name of Dr. Ira Baya wrote. It's called The 4 Things That Matter Most. The 4 things are the phrases, I love you, I forgive you, please forgive me, and thank you. Check out this book if you've never seen it. Planning for your later years. I love this phrase, aging ain't for sissy, right? I hear an amen. Aging ain't for sissies. Art Linkletter created that phrase. He is the originator of that phrase, and he lived to be about 97, 98, and he was one of my favorite people. Be realistic, plan ahead. Something is going to happen to you, and you're going to need some care at some point. Put those things in place that we talked about. It is the biggest gift you can give to your family. Because after all, caregiving is your past, it's your present, it's your future. Don't be thinking you're going to get out of this life without it affecting you, because you're not. Things that you can do now is research any illnesses that may be prevalent in your family. Think about the future. What may be hitting me? What may I be in store for? Know what to expect. And like I said before, don't automatically think your family's going to take care of you. And don't depend on Medicare. Most people don't know that Medicare does not pay for a whole heck of a lot. You know, they'll pay for you in the hospital. They're not going to pay for you in a nursing home unless you need skilled nursing care or PT. And then only up to 100 days as long as you require that for those 100 days. And there's very little they pay for in the home. So you need to plan ahead. Get those documents we talked about and take as good a care as yourself as you can. All right. You might be a caregiver if you're really good at doors, opening doors with your butt so you can pull that wheelchair through. I mastered that when I would pick up my dad and take him in his wheelchair to go see my mom at River Garden, those big old heavy doors with the bars. Got to do it, right? You might be a caregiver if you find yourself wearing your mother's house dress all day. Never got there, thank God. Your favorite caregiving moment is that embarrassing moment when you almost run to help an elderly stranger on a public toilet, because that's just what you do, right? Are we all used to doing that? The last slide is hard to read, but it says, we are the faithful and strong. We are the brave and dedicated. We are caregivers. It's not easy, but we do it because we love each other. We love the people in our lives. So let me tell you about the good news real quick that I promised to tell you about. Congress passed, and then the Senate passed, and then Trump signed it into law about a month ago, something called the RAISE Act, R-A-I-S-E. It stands for Recognize, Assist, Include, Support, and Engage. And what that law is going to do is this. It gives the Department of Health and Human Services a year to create an advisory board from aging professionals in the nation. And in that year, they are to come up with recommendations to bring to Congress to support and help caregivers, and they're going to enact some things to support and help caregivers. Maybe it's a tax break. Maybe it's a little bit of coverage for respite care. Maybe it's more important training on how to care for caregivers. Maybe it's requiring those hospitals to give you more training before you take your loved one home. There are lots of things that are being discussed at the national level, and there are people advocating nationally and at the state level to support you, the caregiver. So have optimism. There's help coming. And in the interim, you have this Caregiver Coalition of Northeast Florida that we created to help you. Come to all of our caregiver conferences. Utilize the caregiver support line if you don't know about it and you need it. Read our newsletters. Let us know what you need. We want to help. Thank you.
Hi, this is Tula, and I'm here to talk to you about Baptist's new Age Well Institute. Are you caring for a loved one who's 65 or older? Are you a boomer like myself who's caring for a parent? And perhaps your parent has been experiencing some decline in their overall health. Let me highly recommend to you the Baptist Age Well Institute. They have the only real geriatrician here in Northeast Florida who is able to look at the whole person. Their comprehensive approach includes a nurse, a doctor, a social worker, a pharmacist, a dietitian. They have their own physical therapy there. They can work with folks with memory disorders. My goal is to help you, the caregiver, find an organization that can care for your loved one who's 65 or older. I take my own parents there, and I highly recommend the Age Well Institute at Baptist. Please give them a call at 904-202-4243. Again, that's 904-202-4243. You'll be so glad you did.
Have you read the new book, Love Stories and Timeless Tips yet? It's by our own Tula Wooten with Tula's Tips for Caregivers. Tula is a caregiver too, as well as an expert on caregiving. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle at Amazon.com. The book is filled with touching stories of caregivers taking care of their loved ones. Each chapter has helpful ideas that we all can use. I love that Tula included a Tula's tip with each story. Her message to caregivers is clear. Take care of yourself so that you can take care of your loved one. This is a beautiful book for all caregivers to read, whether you're a part-time, full-time, or long-distance caregiver, or someone receiving care. You should get the book today. Just go to Amazon.com. Search for Love Stories and Timeless Tips by Tula Wooten.